Ayubowan, Vanakkam, Assalamu alaikum, and of course, a very good evening. Welcome to the third episode of the AmCham Sri Lanka Modern Workplace series. Through this exciting series, we aim to learn the latest and evolving trends, tips, and tricks to increase productivity, as well as to disrupt the paradigm and think so far out of the box that, well, the box ceases to exist. Now, there is no argument that the pandemic has disrupted our lives and our livelihoods. Well, let's disrupt its course right back and kick our goals right over the post. Dr. Rasida Wickramasinghe leads business development for the APAC region at Stax Inc. Rasida has over 20 years of client-facing experience in European and Asian markets and has led multiple engagements with local and international clients across diverse sectors such as financial services, retail, hospitality, education, and industrial manufacturing. Rasida, welcome to the AmCham Sri Lanka Model Workplace series. It's a pleasure to host you this evening.
Thank you, Right. Hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can. Looking forward to learning some business yoga. Over to you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts on this topic, organizational ambidexterity. I think when Rai had put together the various topics for this modern workplace series, when I saw that, I thought that's a very interesting and timely topic. And I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time after a hard day's work. So hopefully I'll keep this to no more than 40-45 minutes of presentation and then questions at the end. And during this presentation, what I'd like to cover is defining what is ambidexterity, the meaning of word ambidexterity, especially in an organization context, and talking about why is it important today, why is organizational ambidexterity relevant today, and sharing a few of my thoughts around how can we enable it within an organization. So when you look at the word ambidexterity in the dictionary, what it means is that able to use the right and left hands equally well. So from a cricketing context, probably not a subject that we want to go into right now, but this image that you see here is from the UK Guardian newspaper when this Kamida Mendis made debut for Sri Lankan cricket playing against England. And what was special about him is that he could bowl right-handed as well as left-handed. So to the right-handed batsman, he was bowling left hand, the left arm off spin, left arm left leg spin, and then to the left-handed batsman, he was bowling right arm off spin, giving a competitive advantage. So one player who could do two different things gave the team a competitive advantage. So from an organizational context, also we're looking at something like this. Being able to do two different things at the same time equally well will give an organization a competitive advantage. So this theory was put forward by these two professors that you see here on this slide, Charles O'Reilly and Michael Tushman from Stanford and Harvard Business Schools, respectively. And they titled the book called Lead and Disrupt. So basically, how can you be an organization that will be leading the market, but at the same time disrupting the market? Because doing both of those at the same time is quite difficult, as we will find out during this presentation. So what's at the heart of the organizational ambidexterity? So according to O'Reilly and Tushman, one is about exploitation. When you focus on the present, it's about how do I make the best use of the products, services, and the assets that is within my organization to maximize my revenues, my profitability, my cash flows. So it really requires you to use your assets strategically and efficiently in a way that you create a market leading positions and you do things better than your competition. But what they point out, while you're doing that and leading the market, it's also important that you keep an eye on the future. Really start understanding what's happening, what is changing, have that external focus, and look to innovate. So while you're executing well against your existing product, services, customer segments, and your competition, you always need to keep an eye on what's out there in the future. What are the other new services, products that I can bring to the market? What are the new customer segments that I'm leaving behind? What are the new technologies that are emerging that I should leverage so that I can continue to be a leader and a disruptor at the same time? And when you think of organizations like Walmart, the largest retailer, they did not create Amazon. If you take Tesla, Tesla was not created by Ford or GM. Or even if you take Microsoft, Microsoft could not create the mobile operating system Android. It's Google, which is a search engine company, that created those. So you can see that although a lot of companies are the market leaders, to catch the next wave and create the next big thing, it's always a struggle. And according to statistics, only a few organizations manage to do that successfully and sustainably over a period of time. And a further extension of that, because this is something that's close to my heart, this is something that my company Stax, for anyone who doesn't know who Stax is, we're a global management consultancy with headquarters in the US, and we've had a office here in Colombo for the last 15 plus years. And when we work with global and local clients, and especially when we do strategy engagements, this is a framework that we use where we refer to it as run and reinvent. So it's quite similar to the exploitation and exploration. So the run part is really your exploitation, and reinvent part is exploration. So, and again, now why does organizations struggle to do both of these at the same time? One is, as you can see, in order to run efficiently, you need more of a short-term focus. And you need to be very disciplined, and you need to have a more command control structure with a greater focus on profitability. The reinvent part of the business is actually can be quite different. It requires a long-term focus. It requires you to try out lots of different things. And also it needs a more of a empowering culture and an external focus and a long-term value creation mindset. So some of the business models that apply in the traditional world or in your present business may not be applicable in that reinvent part, right? So we'll come back and talk a bit more about that as well later on. So I think that is basically what I wanted to cover in terms of the concept. Then why is this concept important? And let me tell that through some slides and some story that is quite, again, a personal journey that I've had when I started my professional career. So let me go to that. And so the first thing is, what I want to emphasize is, again, I think a lot of people are familiar with this concept, is the fact that, we're living in a VUCA world, a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. And this was reiterated by this gentleman here, Paul Roberts, who actually gave a talk a few months ago as part of the Sri Lanka at 100 platform, which is another platform that Stax has started, and AmCham was also a partner for that program. And also during that presentation, one of the other things that Paul introduced is to say that today is the slowest time that we will ever live again. The rate of change that is around us is so fast that when we look back in another 5 years or 10 years, the rate of change that we're experiencing today will actually look like it was very slow. And in his words, we actually, if we go back a couple of 100 years, some of the things that we are doing today is actually, our grandparents or great-grandparents, they would have never imagined in their lifetime that these things will be possible. So what all this means is that the past performance is no guarantee of future success. Right? So that's why I believe the organizational ambidexterity is very relevant, and most all companies need to be aware of it and need to plan accordingly. So in terms of the past performance is not being no guarantee of future success. So let me tell that story through Nokia. I think a lot of you will be familiar with the brand. Nokia is a company that I started my professional career in 1997 when I joined them in the UK. And the company hails from Finland, which in itself is a very interesting country because it's sandwiched between the capitalist West and the socialist East. So only 5 million population, but so about quarter of Sri Lanka's population, but about 3.5 times the GDP. And certainly when Nokia was thriving, large part of that GDP was actually taken up by Nokia. And it's a company that was founded in 1860s and started with paper manufacturing, then went into rubber, manufacturing rubber boots, and in the 1960s entered into telecommunication infrastructure. And a lot of that was actually sold to to Russia. So although Finland was a democratic capitalist country, they always had good relationship with Russia. It was important for them, for their own security, to do that. So a lot of the majority of the sales actually came from the Eastern Bloc. And then in the early 90s, when the whole mobile revolution was taking place, one of the things is that one of the Nokia executives, the gentleman that you see here, Matti Alahuta, he, as part of his MBA dissertation, what he came up with this theory that when new technologies emerge, like mobile communication, every company starts from zero. And that really became the inspiration for Nokia to go out and become a leader in telecommunications, in mobile communications. Because when they got into mobile communications, the likes of Ericsson and Motorola, who have been telecommunication companies for well over a century, were the leaders. But they came into the market, and those companies, Motorola, Ericsson, were more engineering-led, research-led companies. They were taking more of a engineering-led approach to products. And Nokia started looking at it more from a client perspective, the design thinking concept that most of us are familiar with today, and really started creating more appealing mobile phones to the market, and then eventually overtook both Motorola and Ericsson and dominated the mobile handset market for nearly a decade. And when I was part of the organization also, so what was drilled into us is to say that getting to the top was the easy part, but staying there was the hard bit, right? So I think a lot of companies are very aware that the rate of change is so vast, and we always need to keep an eye on what's happening in the future. Because when you're leading and looking to disrupt, it's like driving a vehicle and looking at the rear view mirror, while also at the same time being able to see what's happening 5 kilometers down the road. So two different things, doing it at the same time, can be very, very difficult. So, and in terms of what happened to Nokia, I think, again, most people would be familiar that with the advent of the smartphone, and really the way that Apple looked at the smartphone killed Nokia, and also it killed BlackBerry as well, which was actually the smartphone, before Apple. And I think again this the picture that you see here, you will recognize Steve Jobs on the left hand, but what's interesting, the gentleman on the right hand is the CEO of O2, which is a mobile operator in the UK, the next company that I joined after Nokia. And what's interesting is that O2 is the equivalent of Mobitel in Sri Lanka. In the UK, it's the equivalent of Mobitel. So in other words, it was the mobile arm of British Telecom, which is a legacy dinosaur company, going back hundreds of years, starting with the British Post Office. And I think that in itself is interesting, because that's again an example of run and reinvent, where those incumbent telcos like Mobitel or Deutsche Telekom, which created T-Mobile, or British Telecom, which created O2, recognizing that given the pace of change, the technology, the innovation that is required, that the mobile arm needs to be a separate entity rather than just another product service silo sitting in their incumbent organization. So I think, and also what's interesting is that O2, under Matthew Key's leadership, they could really see the potential of iPhone, and although they were not the market leader at the time, they got exclusive rights to the iPhone for a couple of years, and it really helped them to propel and become the number one. And I think the other interesting thing is also when you look at mobile phones, smartphones, and the operating system. So as I mentioned, Android was not created by Microsoft, right? Android was purchased by Google, and they really, scaled that. And again, when you think, there were so many mobile phone companies, there were so many PC companies like, Microsoft, but the leading operating systems for mobile was created by a different company. So again, showing that market domination doesn't necessarily lead you to see that next big wave and get into that. And then let me just quickly talk about this. I think, all of us are, living through the pandemic, and I hope, all of you and your loved ones are keeping safe and fine. And if you think back to March 2020, when we went into a lockdown, the speed at which we went into remote working, right? So pretty much Zoom and Teams became the de facto tools that we worked and engaged with our colleagues as well as with our clients. And the rate at which it happened, it's almost overnight flick of the switch, going from physical office-based working to remote working. And now when you look at what are the repercussions of that, so for example, the airline industry, which depends on business travelers, they may never recover to the same levels. And I think what's worse for the airline industry is that a lot of their profits and revenue comes from business travelers. Or if you look at commercial real estate, it may never have the same demand that was seen at pre-pandemic levels, as more and more of the workforce work remotely or get into hybrid working models where they won't need the the same real estate capacity. Or even high street, cafes, restaurants that do depend on a lot of business traffic, business footprint for their survival. And if you go back pre-pandemic level and you ask any of these industries who are them key competitors, they may not have seen Zoom or Teams as their key competitors. But now the reality is that with remote working, they have actually become the competitors to these industries. And I think just taking on from that, is also, this is another interesting graphic talking about different technologies that has evolved over the last couple of centuries, and the economic impact. And what you will see is that, you have the steam engine and the railways that were there in the early 1800s, but in early 1900s, there were three key innovations from the telephone, the automobile, and electricity. But when you look into beyond the 80s, into the 2020s, now enabled by the power of computers and the internet, you get a number of other technologies emerging at the same time, from artificial intelligence to blockchain to robotics. The whole energy production and storage is also getting disrupted significantly. So all of these activities will create unparalleled economic opportunities. So I think this is another reason why we need to really operate with this mindset of ambidexterity, that while we do what we are doing well, what's bringing in us money well today, we really need to keep an eye on the future, and we need to innovate for the future. Right? So this is actually coming from a company called ARK Investments, which is it's run by a lady called Kathy Wood. Very interesting if you are interested in reading more about that, because they are really betting on these new technologies taking off and really creating disproportionate growth in the market, and creating equity funds, based off those companies. And another thing to look at is, I think, when we look at the 2000 years of economic history. So what you see here is that on the y-axis, you see the share of the world GDP, and then you see the 2000-year history that's kind of mapped here. And what you see is that until the Industrial Revolution took place in Europe and US, the Asian economies dominated the world share of the GDP. And then through the 1800s to the present time, the European, the US economies had the major share, but now a significant part of the global GDP is shifting back again to Asia, which is where we are located. And also, if it fast forward, what we will see is that in 2020, for the first time, the Asian GDPs were bigger than the rest of the world GDPs. And what, according to PwC, what's predicted here is that, again, if you look at just China and India combined, will contribute more than 1/3 of the global economy by 2050. Right now is less than a quarter, and the European and the US market will still be significant, but their overall share will drop. So therefore, there's a lot of regional economic opportunities also that are opening up, especially for Sri Lankan companies, beyond our traditional European and US market as well. So I think that's another reason for us to look to continue to innovate and look to come up with service propositions that can be taken into other geographies. And also, when you look at digital overall, also it's not it's not only happening in the West. It's US, Europe, they do have companies that are leading this, but overall there are a lot of Asian companies and industries also that are embracing technology. So this is a recent study that was done by BCG, and so what you see here is by different industries, they have something called a digital acceleration index. They are mapping the different industries across different regions. And according to this graphic, what you're seeing is that a lot of the industries in Asia is actually leading, even compared to the US and European industry. So, for example, technology, financial services, healthcare, you can see that overall across regions also, they tend to take a lead. But overall, it's not just the US and European markets that are seeing these digital acceleration. We are starting to see a lot of Asian industries and companies are also embracing that. So therefore, if we are to be competitive as companies in the region, it's also important that we also embrace those and make sure that our industries are also digitized and transformed as quickly as possible, leveraging current technologies as well as emerging technologies. Right. So with that, what I'd like to do is to move on to talk a bit about now how do we enable this within our organizations. And for me, I think one of the strongest weapons to do that is our mindset, right? And when we talk about mindset, I think also from a management perspective, from a consulting perspective, if you think back, I think the previous decades, we had the things like the BCG matrix, the Ansoff matrix, and really, when we went from one product or service to another, or from one market to another, we kind of moved through these matrices, right? And when I talked about Nokia, starting with paper, getting into rubber, getting into telecoms, mobile telecoms, is really, moving through this BCG matrix and then really expanding into markets. But I think while these frameworks can still be relevant, I think it's important for us to be aware that there is another set of things that we need to be aware of. So for example, this whole concept of linear and exponential. So exponential organizations are classed as organizations that grow 10x times their peers. So compared to your competitors, if you're growing 10x, your growth rate is 10 times more, then you are an exponential company. And a lot of the leading tech companies in the world today, they have experienced that kind of growth. Also, when you think why they can do that, is also now in a traditional sense, you will start in one market and then you will expand into different markets. But now a lot of the platforms that are getting launched is really they have access to 4.5 billion internet users in the world that are connected to the internet. So really you're launching products to the world. So that's why you have somebody like AliExpress in more than 190 countries, or Uber operating in more than 70 countries, because when you create these platforms, you're creating them for a global market. And it's very, very, you can very quickly scale that. And that's why a lot of the time, the legacy companies, sometimes they fail to see where this competition could come from, because it's no longer like I talked about in the Zoom and Microsoft example, is no longer the traditional competitors. There are new competitors that are coming from different angles. And also the other framework that is here, crossing the chasm, it's also, I think, again, traditionally we looked at, if you have a first mover advantage, yes, you're doing well. But it's really not just the first mover, it's the first scaler, because you need to be able to come up with a product service proposition and be able to scale that. So you really need to go from these early adopters to early majorities, which is what's termed as the chasm crossing, and really make it big in terms of making your the products and services that you innovated, make sure that they do become mainstream and they become your cash cows and the products and services that generate the major share of your revenue in the future. And just building on from that, I think what I'd like to do is just explain a bit about this matrix, which is again, coming from, it's a combination of a couple of theories, but I think it applies well to the run and reinvent or the organizational ambidexterity framework. So if you focus on the right-hand side of this matrix, where you see this performance zone and productivity zone. So this is really about your existing business, the exploitation or the run part of your business, where you maximize your sales to make sure that you make the number, you capture and continue to increase your market share with your existing products and services, and you do that by making sure your delivery is as efficient as possible. So that's what really that helps you to maximize your revenue and your profitability and create those cash reserves that will help you to explore and innovate, which is the next part, the left-hand side of this matrix. Because now while you have this performance zone and productivity zone working optimally, you need to create these incubation and transformation zones as well. So incubation zone is about innovating. It's really keeping an eye out on the next wave of technologies, innovations, the consumer needs, the trends in the market, and really positioning yourself to catch this next wave, right? Positioning for the next wave. And as I mentioned, that not everything that you innovate is necessarily going to scale, right? So that's why if you take a company like Amazon and Jeff Bezos, what he talks about is, I might try 1,000 different new things, but I know 1 or 2 of them will really pay off and they will scale. So on the back of that, and Amazon Web Services is a great example of that. Really, creating that, and Bezos talking about for nearly 6-7 years, nobody really saw the potential of that, and there have been so many technology companies in that space not really seeing the potential, and now Amazon is profitable only because of Amazon Web Services, right? So it's really this concept of this performance zone. So if you actually can think of your organization in this way also, I have my performance and productivity zones that deliver my numbers today and profits today, but at the same time I'm creating these next zones within the business. So a bit like what I was talking about, BT and O2 example, or I think even some of our leading apparel companies have created their own innovation arms, the technology arms, just to kind of go out and explore and create these different organizations that need a different set of cultures, different set of employees, and different mindset, just to get that exploration gene going. And then I think in terms of exploring dialogue, if you see being a mobile, company, again, the number of things that they are into, so many different things, and not all of these things will work. But you can see that they are really, looking to innovate and become a thought leader, try different things, and then across from sports to healthcare to retail to finance, you name it, right? In every industry, because they're really looking to see how can we leverage this 12 million plus customer base that we have and start introduce these new services, because again, the in terms of distribution and getting people on board for these services for dialogue, it becomes really easy with their existing base. And I think given we've talked about the need to continually look in the rear view mirror and at the same time figuring out what's happening a few kilometers down the road. And again, in terms of Samsung, and this is the chairman K.H. Lee, who is from second generation and the one who really propelled Samsung to be a global leader in electronics, starting from his father's legacy. This is an ethos that which they seem to operate, which is to say that every organization or every successful company should maintain a heightened sense of crisis at all times. So even when you're successful, if you think actually, because what happens to a lot of the successful companies, they become complacent. So this is the way that Samsung's leader has really made sure that his company is always working at the edge. The people are working at the edge of their comfort zone, and they're always trying to innovate and trying to be a leader, and not being satisfied just being leaders in their current categories, but really looking into the future and wanting to lead those future categories as well. Yeah, so just kind of bringing all that thoughts together, I think as I mentioned, I think mindset is very important when we look at creating ambidextrous organizations, and I think with mindset is also defining a purpose for the company. This is usually referred to as a massive transformational purpose, so something that everybody in the organization can identify themselves with and really motivate themselves. So what you see here is at Stacks how we operate in terms of our purpose statement is freedom to dream and power to make it happen, which kind of resonates with each one of us. And then Sri Lanka at 100 platform, which I referred to, is really a platform that we have created with USAID to really look at how can we propel the mid-sized companies to become large regional leaders, which will then eventually will help to make Sri Lanka a developed country 100 years after independence, which is not that far away, by the way. And then what brings all of these together is then again the culture. I think the culture, how do you really allow for two different cultures to coexist in your organization? As I said, the exploitation part needs more of a command control, very focused, disciplined, a doers culture, whereas the innovation culture is more of a dreamers culture, right? So where you need to create that space for people to think outside the box, as Rai was mentioning at the beginning during the introduction, and then really empower them and really that they can try things without fear of failure. Because again, I think a lot of these companies, successful companies today, they encourage innovation and they know that not everything is going to succeed. And along with that, I think capital is also an important component. And I find, what Reliance in India is doing interesting in this context, because again, it's a company run by the second generation. A lot of people refer to Reliance as AT&T, Exxon, and Walmart put together in India. So one company, being in all of these verticals and really very brick and mortar verticals. But if you look at through their telecom arms, Reliance Telecoms, creating this Joe platform, what they're looking to do is really now, how do we bring all of these millions of mom and pop shops that are out in India, from providing education to providing healthcare to giving access to farmers to trade their produce to whatnot. How do we enable this digital platform, and they're taking Geo as that vehicle, and they are getting some of the largest capital investors around the world to come and invest with them. So Facebook, as you know, has invested in them. KKR, Silver Lake, two large private equities who are Stack's clients as well. They have also invested. So really, getting access to capital markets and bringing in equity capital, because again, I think a lot of local companies, they are very comfortable with debt capital, but equity capital and getting that from outside parties, other than the stock exchange is also something of a novelty. So I think capital is also needed in terms of creating ambidextrous organizations. And then finally, what I want to kind of extend this and say it really doesn't, stop with the organization, and actually to create this within the organizations, the individuals need ambidexterity also. So really, us as individuals in an organization, we also need to have that exploitation and exploration mindset at an individual level, looking at what are our capabilities today and what should be the new set of capabilities that we should look to develop, because we know that the world is changing, and I think according to some of the latest studies, with all the advent of technology, something like 400 million people across the world needs to get reskilled by 2030, because a lot of the activities that are being performed in certain industries will get replaced through automation, through robots, and so on. So I think that's the final thought that I wanted to share in terms of extending this beyond the organization to the individual. Okay, right. Over to you.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Rasta. So let me just take a few questions that have now come in from the audience. This one is coming in off Facebook, actually. Rasta, given your experience in the consulting industry, are there any organizations that you could use as examples for us to understand in terms of organizational ambidexterity? If you are able to share information that is maybe.
Yeah, so I think the last example that I referred to, Reliance, I talked about, I think that's a good example of an Asian company really, looking at, and the Reliance is doing, creating the Geo platform while they're having a very sound brick and mortar business, from oil and gas to retail to, traditional telecoms, right, in all of those areas. And I think the other kind of companies is, for example, Toyota has been mentioned as a company that really has embraced ambidexterity well, because even if you think of hybrid cars, they might not necessarily be the first innovator, and they might well be even in electric vehicles. They are not the first to the market, but when they do come in, and Toyota will be releasing their electric vehicle next year, I think they really do it in a way that it's not too early to the market, it's not too late, and when they do it, they can scale and still become a market leader. I think Zara or Amazon, those are also have been mentioned as companies that have experienced ambidexterity well. And again, I think if you have to look at some of the Asian companies, even if you take something like WeChat, which I think most of us are familiar with now, is again it was just a desktop messaging app, which really had the foresight to see the mobiles becoming the dominant way of interacting with the consumers, and really transforming that desktop platform into a mobile platform, and really extending it into payments and other ecosystems, and really creating this super app, right? So I think those are some of the examples that comes to my mind.
Great. So you were saying about first mover advantage versus right time mover and right way mover, right? Could you maybe give us a little more thought because basically you're talking about shaking up the entire paradigm of first mover advantage, right? A little bit more thought in that.
Yes. Yeah, so I think that first mover and first scaler, right? So again, I think Facebook is a good example that where they were not a first mover, but they were a first scaler, right? So what that means is because the way technology evolves and the rate at which technology changes, sometimes although you innovate and you introduce new products and services to the market, you might not necessarily be able to go and dominate it. Now, I talked about the mobile operating systems also. It's not that the likes of Nokia or BlackBerry were not creating operating systems. They were trying to create operating systems, but they couldn't create something that could scale, right? So, and I think on that example, actually, Bill Gates have talked about that not being able to conquer the mobile operating system as his biggest business mistake, right? And it just shows even a company of that magnitude, of that scale, having so many resources, how easy it is for them to miss catching that next wave, right? So I think that's kind of what I meant by this, first mover don't necessarily win. You really have to be able to scale it, and sometimes it's the people who get into the game late. And Toyota could well do this in electric cars also. Tesla has been making all the headlines, but it could be Toyota coming in and really scaling and creating scale on electric vehicles. And I think it's partly timing, because at the early stages the technology is very expensive. Users are, they're quite, it's a novel experience for the user, so sometimes it takes time.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So that's the end of the questions that we have for you. But I have to say, I suddenly looked up and realized that it was already 7:45. That presentation went so fast. It was just so interesting. And something that you said, to transform what we do, we must first transform how we think. No truer words have I heard, either in business or in life. Thank you very much, Rasita, for taking the time to share on modern workplace, for this extremely interesting presentation and your insights on how we can build organizational ambidexterity. Probably one of the most important practices that we can put in motion if we are to transform into a modern workplace. To all our participants on Zoom and our viewers on YouTube and Facebook, thank you for your participation. A reminder, as always, to subscribe, click the alert, and of course, share the YouTube video, which is what will assist us to continue bringing AmCham's diverse and immediately impactful online resources to you free of charge. As we conclude, just a few minutes onto the mark, a reminder from Rasita and myself, and of course the AmCham team. Let's keep our physical distance, masks on, hand sanitized, immunity boosted, fingers crossed and spirits up. Stay safe, everyone. Good night and God bless.